Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Anything with Alvin. Now this one's going to be a fun one. I wanted to do a little experiment of some sort where you make chocolate chip cookies but only change one variable to see how it kind of affects the way the cookie turns out. As someone who loves chocolate chip cookies and tweaking, optimizing every single little aspect of it to make it a better cookie, this is something I've actually wanted to do for quite some time. A lot of talented people have done this on a different scale. There's pictures of, grids of different cookies, but I kind of wanted to go through as many as I possibly could and record the video process of how it all went down. Yeah, anyway, we have a lot of chocolate, got a lot of dark brown sugar, flour, and butter. Now, let's lay down some ground rules. The control recipe, the base recipe that I will be using to compare everything to, is the Toll House recipe. It's on the back of almost every bag they have. You can easily find it online. It's a very solid standard base cookie recipe that'll give you a chocolate chip cookie that will do the job, and it doesn't require any crazy ingredients. This is going to be the base cookie or the control recipe that we're modifying one aspect at a time towards. So the control recipe goes as follows. In a mixer, I'm taking 1 stick of softened butter, creaming it with 75 grams of granulated sugar, 75 grams of dark brown sugar, and then adding in 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1 large egg, and after that's all mixed in, I'm going to add in 135 grams of all-purpose flour, half a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of baking soda, and then 1 cup of chocolate chips. Pretty standard. You probably know someone or you've made this recipe yourself. Once the dough is mixed, it goes into a bowl to chill for about an hour or so, just until it's not super warm. Once that's all ready, they get scooped out on medium-sized ice cream scoops onto a tray and into an oven at 350 degrees for about 17 to 20 minutes, depending on your oven. That is our standard recipe. And once these come out of the oven, this is your classic looking chocolate chip cookie. A couple of ripples, kind of a golden brown outside with a softer white inside, chocolate chip studded throughout, nothing to complain about. This will do the job any day of the week if you want a cookie, and you could easily bring this recipe to anywhere you want. I've done it many times. The standard chocolate chip cookie flavor that you probably already can imagine, but nothing too crazy complex about it. So what I wanted to do was run a bunch of different kinds of tests, testing every single aspect of this cookie that I could probably think of. And so let us begin. The original one uses chocolate chips. I wanted to test it compared to chocolate chunks versus chopped bar chocolate, which are two actually very different things. Chocolate chunks are the ones you find in the bags that are in chunk form, and chopped chocolate is when you take bars of chocolate and you chop it up yourself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a control batch of dough, and while that's going in the mixer, I'm going to chop up some semi-sweet dark chocolate bars, giving uneven textures so we both have little shards, big chunks, and that tiny chocolate dust that inevitably piles up when you chop up a bar of chocolate, because that does actually make a difference in your final cookie, I think. Okay, so how I did this was I took the amount of dough that we made inside the mixer that has no chocolate, remember that. I weighed it and I divided it in half between 2 bowls. And between the 2 bowls, first I'm going to add in the chopped chocolate, taking all of that and mixing it until it's evenly incorporated. Not trying to overmix it because I don't want the dough to get tight. I'm trying to keep as many variables as I can the same. Obviously, there's going to be differences in slight temperatures and how many times I mixed it, but hopefully we'll be able to see some pretty significant results that these little inconsistencies won't actually make a difference. Once the chopped chocolate dough is ready, I'm going to now combine the chocolate chunks that were bought, again at the store, into our control base dough, and also give that a mix in a similar amount of time. The bowl on the left is the chocolate chip cookie dough with chocolate that has been chopped up from the bar. And the bowl on the right consists of not chocolate chips, but chocolate chunks that were bought at the store. These do have a little bit of a coating, but they're closer to more like chocolate chunks than the chocolate chips are, because the chocolate chips have a lot more of the sugar and the coating to make them not stick. And hopefully we'll see that in the baking results. So once these doughs are chilled again for about an hour to 2 hours, I'm going to scoop these out onto a baking sheet lined with parchment paper. And as you can already see, the one on the left is the chopped chocolate, the one on the right is the chunk chocolate. And because of the little chocolate powder and shards, the dough is clearly a little bit darker on the left side. There's probably going to be more chocolate flavor imparted into the dough, but already we're seeing a huge visual difference by not using chocolate chips. The one on the right, the chocolate chunks that we bought at the store, don't have that shard and that dust, so they're going to look similar to the control base. All right, and after these bake for about 18 minutes, we have our comparisons ready. So on the right, on that isolated sheet of parchment paper, are 2 control cookies, the normal Toll House cookie recipe, just there for comparison. In the middle, we have our chopped chocolate cookies, and on the left, we have our chocolate chunk cookies. Now, the visual differences are pretty striking right off the bat. The one in the middle has a lot more of these smaller flecks of chocolate. It's a little bit darker throughout compared to the chocolate chunks. It definitely looks a little bit more quote unquote artisan, and it does take a little bit more extra work. The chocolate chunk one is clearly more like the control cookie, where none of the chocolate kind of really incorporates into the dough, but you do get larger sections where it's just chocolate. So compared to chocolate chips, it's almost less interspersed out, but once you get a bit, there's gonna be more of it. So tearing these open, again, with the chopped chocolate, you can see the chocolate is a little bit more interspersed throughout in different kinds of textures, sometimes little tiny flecks, sometimes larger pools. And also because we're chopping chocolate that hasn't been coated with too many preservatives, there's going to be a lot more melting and pooling of chocolate, because a lot of these chocolate chunks and chips have anticoagulants on the surface, which help them not, stick together in the bag, but not necessarily the best for baking, but they do retain their shape after baking. Flavor-wise, the chopped chocolate is way better. You can kind of taste more of the real chocolate flavor. This is the kind of cookie you probably have to pay $5 for, whereas the other ones are maybe around the $2 or $3 range at the bakery. I definitely prefer the middle one. It is how I've been personally making my chocolate chip cookies for years, but it's really nice to see them side by side. But there's nothing wrong with the classic, and if you're going to spend a little bit more money on chocolate for your chocolate chip cookie, I would recommend going for good bar chocolate that you can just chop up, because the texture and color are going to be instantly more significant. The next test, we will be doing sugars. This one, we're going to be comparing brown sugar only versus white sugar only, obviously compared to our control. So this procedure is pretty similar. Let's make each control batch, except instead of brown sugar and white sugar being in equal quantities in the control recipe, we're just going to be using exclusively one or the other. So doubling each one in each recipe and using none of the other. These are the doughs after they've been made. Obviously the brown sugar one is a lot more brown and the white sugar one is a lot more white. And the sky is blue, yes. All right, same procedure. Let's get these doughs in the fridge, chill them, scoop them out, bake them, and compare them. White sugar one is clearly in the middle, and you get it at this point. You can probably tell. Let's get to the examination and the tasting. So the white sugar ones spread a lot, and they have zero color on it. It really does not look like an appetizing cookie whatsoever. Really spread a lot. I think that's just because white sugar compared to brown sugar does not have molasses, and molasses is a little bit stickier, and white sugar will just melt and spread. And also because without the addition of molasses, there's less water. And when there's water in a cookie, the water will kind of almost activate the gluten in the flour a little bit more, causing it to hold on to itself just a little bit. So the brown sugar one is a lot tighter compared to the control. It's definitely a little smaller in circular size and definitely darker. And when you break it open, it's very soft and chewy. Because of the molasses, it's not only darker, but it has more water content. So it kind of has a little bit more of a cake-like texture because of the water addition in the molasses. When you break these apart, the white one almost just crumbles in your hand in a soft and not a good way. There's like no structure on this thing. The brown one is definitely chewier and softer. And when it comes to the taste test, Nico will now sub in. So he said that the flavor is not very deep, it's not very complex, and the texture is quote wispy. Falls apart instantly and didn't really like it, which made a lot of sense. There's no depth of flavor and it just tastes like white sugar. I think that was actually the biggest difference I realized, is just that without the brown sugar, a chocolate chip cookie does not have that signature chocolate chip cookie flavor at all. It just tastes like chocolate chips with sugar, which is technically what it kind of is, but which is really lacking whatever the molasses is doing to the flavor of the cookie after it's been baked. I will say though, there is merit in having both sugars. The control was definitely my preferred one out of the three, because if it was only brown sugar, it almost was a little too chewy and wet in a not great way. I think having both really does make sense in terms of both balancing flavor, texture, and visual appeal. So I'll be sticking to using both sugars. There definitely makes a lot of sense here. There probably could have been a lot of tests we could have ran with coconut sugars and stuff like that, but how about we run a test with sugar substitutes? We're going to be testing making chocolate chip cookies with honey and comparing that with maple syrup. So we're going to make each dough, but instead we're going to be substituting the honey and the maple syrup. And it seemed like you had to use about 3/4 of the amount of the sugar required in volume as we use the liquid sweeteners, because liquid sweeteners have a higher density of sugar per volume because the sugars are dissolved. Now, obviously the concern is because of the liquid in honey and maple syrup, I was very curious to see how they would bake up compared to normal, and if they would be an acceptable substitute in a pinch. Here's the dough with maple syrup. Here's the dough with honey. Definitely a lot lighter in color. Again, after chilling and scooping out, let's bake it and give it a C. The one in honey is on the left. The one with only maple syrup is in the middle. From the looks of it, I really understand why these are not acceptable substitutes in chocolate chip cookies. The extra water content makes them really puffy. They almost look like muffins and muffin tops. They're really spongy and bready. I really don't like that. Maple syrup one definitely puffed more and browned less because it had more water. I think the honey one browned more than the maple syrup because the honey has less water compared to maple syrup, which makes sense. If you pick it up and tear it open, it really does feel like those muffin top, almost like those muffin top snacks you buy at Costco. It's a lot spongy, it's very bready. If you gave someone and told this was a cookie, they'd be like, ooh, I don't know about that one. I might not trust your dessert decisions in the future. If you don't call it a cookie though, I think it's fine. Like Rachel said, it's not a cookie, but if you don't say it's a cookie, it's totally fine. If you tell someone it's like a chocolate chip muffin top or, chocolate chip loaf thing, then I think that's totally acceptable. The also interesting thing is the maple syrup doesn't actually have a noticeable flavor after it's been baked. I think the maple syrup flavor is actually more of an aroma that kind of gets lost, but the honey one is a very strong flavor and aroma because honey itself, I think, is very, very, very powerful in flavor. So it does really taste like honey. I guess if you do like that, then sure, but I would not recommend doing this if you wanted the texture and the appeal of a normal chocolate chip cookie. Because of the extra water content, it really messes up with the way that this works. However, if you wanted to make chocolate chip muffin tops in a pinch and you like that spongier, breadier texture, then by all means use the standard Toll House recipe, do 3/4 of what they asked for in sugar in maple syrup or honey, and you'll get exactly what this is. All right, that was a fun test. The next test, we are testing leaveners. Now, the original recipe only has a half teaspoon of baking soda, but I wanted to see if maybe sometimes you don't have baking soda. You can definitely substitute baking soda for baking powder. That's a pretty common thing. Just do a 3-to-1 ratio. But also, how would the chocolate chip cookie look like if you just completely omitted it? I feel like oftentimes when we bake, we follow recipes, but we're not really sure if this little tiny addition of something is gonna make a difference. So let's find out. I made a control batch according to the Toll House recipe, except there was no baking soda in the batch. I split that batch in two, and in half of it, I added triple the amount of baking powder to baking soda because that's usually how it's converted. So in this case, 1.5 teaspoons. And in the other half batch, I added no leavener. So the only difference between these two is the addition of baking powder. As expected, they look the same. I don't think a leavener is going to make a visual or a cosmetic difference instantly off the bat. I think that'll come out after baking. So once these go into the fridge, rest for 2 hours, scooped out, again on a tray, into the oven, they look the same. But when they come out, the results are very, very, very different. So on the right again, we have our control cookies, very standard recipe. In the middle are the cookies with no leavener whatsoever. And on the left are the cookies with only baking powder. The one with no leavener is just stark white. There is no browning on this whatsoever. It's also got this weird crackly, like webbed texture on the outside, which usually means the cookie recipe wasn't adjusted properly for ratios. And it looks like the one with baking powder only spread out a little bit more and brown a little bit more around the edges compared to the control. The one with no leavener clearly looks like we forgot something, which in this case we intentionally did. So there is a reason why, baking powder helps with a cookie. It adds the puffiness while it bakes. It's a little bit more even and gets those nice ripples that you want rather than just dough that's sugared out and just baking in the oven. Clearly the baking powder one is better to the no leavener visually, but it also does look like the baking soda got browner, which I think is something that baking soda does. Baking soda is commonly added to things in, meat dishes or even like pork to get it crispy and browning, even wings. I think it has something to do with pH. And I think when you add baking powder, which is just baking soda plus cornstarch, the cornstarch kind of gets in the way of whatever the baking soda does. So it makes sense that the baking powder one is slightly less golden brown than the control, which is just baking soda. From an eating perspective, I would not recommend no leavener at all. It's just very dense and weird. It doesn't really feel like a cookie when you eat it. It feels very kind of crunchy, but soft and dense and not really good. The one with the baking powder definitely tastes more like a cookie. So that was a fun one. I really like seeing the differences between those. Nico taste tested this one too, and I think he also agreed. He really did not like the no leavener one. Next is a pretty simple one. It is a temperature baking test. So for this one, I'm testing baking it at 300 versus baking it at 350, which is our control, and baking it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's just see how it affects it. So we're taking our control dough. We already have our controls baked, so we're just gonna bake one batch at 300 degrees and the other batch at 400 degrees. They're gonna be slightly adjusted baking times because we do wanna make sure that they do get cooked through. So the 400 degree one, we cooked for about 3 minutes less, and 300 degree one, we cooked for about 5 minutes more. So the 300 degree one ended up going for about 24 minutes, and the 400 degree one took about 13 minutes. And here are the results. Again, the control is on the right side, 350 degrees. Our 300 degree cookie is in the middle. Our 400 degree cookie is on the left, as expected. 300 degrees, because it's cooking at a slower temperature, it has more time to spread. It definitely browns a little bit less and is a little bit more even overall because we gave it 23 minutes in the oven because that's how long it took for the center to be ready. Now, the 400 degree one, because it's so hot, it cooks a lot faster. So the dough doesn't have much time to spread. So the circle is a little bit smaller. It's a little bit thicker, and the edges have a contrast in brownness compared to the middle. So I guess the 300 degree one kind of looks like the cookie you might find, at any bakery that has one, but maybe they didn't make it themselves and they just bought it, outsourced it, and that's fine. It's still good. And the 400 degree one is something that might, people might want to reach for and go, ooh, that looks a little bit more delicious. There's definitely a stronger golden brown appeal to this one, but I would say that none of them are bad at all. It's just a little bit different for everyone. 300 degrees is for someone who likes a really soft chocolate chip cookie flavor that's almost like cookie dough because there's less of the browning flavor in it. The 400 degree one has almost two unique different textures. The outside is thicker, crustier chocolate chip cookie baked flavor, and the inside is a little bit more soft, again, like cookie dough. So if you want a cookie that almost tastes like two cookies, I would say go for 400 degrees, but make sure you don't burn it. And if you just want a larger cookie that's just really, 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 really soft, and you just want the flavor of cookie dough that's still cooked, go for 300 degrees. And if you kind of want a little bit of both, go for 350. Just like IGN said, a little something for everyone. All right, next up we are testing butters. One of them is going to use melted butter instead of room temperature butter, and the other one is going to use brown butter, a personal and crowd favorite when it comes to making chocolate chip cookies. Every time I make a dessert, including cookies, I'm browning the butter. And I know why, but I do want to see them compared side by side. So we have the same amount of butter in each recipe. One's been microwaved until it's melted, and one has been browned in the pan without any additional moisture addition back. So we're gonna make doughs, the exact same recipe. The only difference is how the butter was made. 2 batches in the stand mixer, same as usual. And we have our 2 doughs ready. On the left is our brown butter chocolate chip cookie dough. You can already probably tell it's darker and it smells a lot more aromatic than the one on the right, which is our melted butter cookie dough. Maybe you don't even have a stand mixer, you don't want to have the time to soften your butter, so you just melt it in the microwave. I think this is an important test to see if that's worth it or if it's going to make a big of a difference at all. Again, these doughs go into the fridge to chill for 2 hours, get scooped out on a medium ice cream scoop onto a tray with parchment paper, into the oven, 350 degrees, 17 to 18 minutes until they are ready. And here are the results. The melted butter chocolate chip cookies are probably the same color as the control ones, as expected. The brown butter chocolate chip cookies are a little bit deeper in color. And I will say the brown butter also has less spreading because the brown butter does not have the water of the other ones, because once you brown the butter, the 15 to 20% water inside butter completely evaporates. So there's less room for the sugar to dissolve, therefore less spreading in your cookie. Flavor-wise, the brown butter wins. There's so much more aromatic and complexity go on, but I think the biggest and most interesting thing is comparing the melted butter to the control, which is just softened butter. The melted butter tastes exactly the same as the control version, but it's just denser, because if you melt the butter, you're losing a little bit of the air that was in it. You want a puffier, airier cookie, go for soft. If you want a denser, chewier cookie, I would say melted. Just make sure the melted butter is not too hot when you add it to everything else, otherwise it can melt the chocolate. All right, this one is a fun one. How about let's test 50% additional chocolate chips versus 100% additional. So double the chocolate in a chocolate chip cookie recipe, just to see how it turns out. Is there such thing as too much chocolate? We're probably gonna find out with this one. Now, everybody likes the chocolate chips in a cookie, right? When you look at a cookie, you get excited because there's more chocolate chips than you expected. It feels like a win when you can excavate a chunk of chocolate out of a cookie dough, even the whole thing's yours. Anyway, we don't need to talk about my vices. So we're gonna make the recipe exact same as the control, except for one of the batches, we're gonna increase the chocolate chips by 50%. And then the next one, we're gonna increase it by 100%. So double the chocolate chips added. And you know, when you take out the dough and put it in the bowls, surprisingly, they look kind of similar. So again, into the fridge, chill, scoop, bake. Let's see how these turn out. Okay, there's a little bit of a difference if you can't tell. The control recipe is on the right, the 100% double chocolate is in the middle, and the 50% chocolate is in the left. For the 50% one, it has a little bit more ripples, and when you pick it up, it's very sturdy. It's very sturdy. You might think, oh, you're increasing the chocolate, you're increasing the fat, it should be a lot softer and melt, but I think it's because chocolate chips are technically not the same as bar chocolate. There's a lot more sugar and anticoagulant coating on these. It'll actually make the structure of the cookie a lot more sturdy than your typical chocolate chip cookie. So increasing the chocolate chips will increase the sturdiness. They got some structure to them. The double one, the 100% more chocolate chips, is extremely sturdy. This thing feels like a melee weapon. It's probably got a durability counter that's higher than, I don't know, Link's Master Sword. So let's compare the cross section. The 50% increase in chocolate is on the top. The double chocolate is on the bottom, 100% increase. And you know, when you break it open, you eat it, it's like eating the words chocolate chip cookie, except those first two words are in caps lock, and the second one is a parentheses that's, you know, like a subtext. You got to read at the bottom of the page or something. Like you're just eating basically chocolate chips, which is not a bad thing. If you love the taste of chocolate chips and chocolate chip cookies and you kind of hunt for them, you're gonna like this cookie. You just don't really get that like cookie from the flour and the sugar and the egg and the brown flavor of the cookie, and you just get more of the chocolate flavor. That's pretty much it. If you love chocolate chips, throw in 50% more, throw it in double, and I think that's totally fine. Nobody's gonna be mad that there's a lot of chocolate in their cookie. They don't want chocolate in their cookie, they might as well just go to jail. All right, our next test is going to be using solely bread flour versus solely cake flour compared to the classic, which is all-purpose flour. If you don't happen to know this, bread flour has a higher protein content, which means it's better suited for bread because it's chewier and it has more strength to it. Cake flour has less protein in it, which is why it's best designed for cakes and pastries. It's more airy and more chance of it being soft and more crumbly. So those are the two main differences. All-purpose flour is kind of a mix, which is why it's called all-purpose. Like IGN said, a little bit of something for everybody. But let's see if it's worth going one direction or the other. Here they are. Breaking these open, the bread one is a little bit tighter in terms of crumb. If you like a chewier, more dense cookie, you're gonna like using only bread flour. And personally, I like a chewier, denser cookie because there's really not much else holding it together besides a tiny bit of water from the egg and the vanilla extract. Compared to the control, the cake flour has a little bit more ripples, which makes sense because there's less gluten to kind of tighten up on the way, so it's gonna spread out and kind of be crispier and airier like it should be. But if you wanna make a Tate style cookie that's thinner and crispier, you should go for all cake flour. I think it does actually make a pretty noticeable difference in the final result. Choosing a different flour that might be a little bit more expensive will make a difference that you can notice. Okay, our next test is going to be testing only egg yolks and comparing that to only egg whites. Now, for one recipe, instead of using one egg, we're going to use 3 egg yolks to substitute that. That'll hopefully make up the same amount of liquid quantity as the 1 egg. And then the other one, we're going to use only egg whites. We're going to use about 1 to 2 egg whites, depending on how big they are. But I try to measure them by weight and make sure that it was the same. So we kind of ended up between 1.5 and 2. As you could probably expect, the color difference is pretty noticeable. The egg whites one is a lot whiter and the egg yolks one is a lot more deep in yellow and rich because yolks are yellow and egg whites are white. Anyways, after these doughs have been chilled in the fridge 2 hours, they get scooped out, put on a tray, and into the oven they go. 350 degrees for 18 minutes or so. Now this, very, very, very big difference. The egg whites are a lot more brown, a lot more golden brown, a lot flatter, a lot wider, and picking them up, they're a lot spongier and softer, which makes sense because egg whites not only have higher protein content than egg yolks, they have a lot more water content. So when you add extra protein and extra water to a cookie recipe, it's going to puff up a little bit more, it's going to spread a little bit more, and it's going to be a little bit more on the spongy side rather than the chewy or the denser side. Now the egg yolks one is really interesting. There's actually not a lot of browning here compared to the egg whites. I think just because egg whites are so much more pure protein, that browns quicker in the oven compared to the fats in an egg yolk. yolk. The egg yolk one is a lot tighter. It's almost not brown at all. And it has that more like softer, it falls apart faster, more denser texture. So Rachel and Nico taste tested this one because I was kind of getting sugared out at this point, but I had to, rest up so I can go back in because I'm on cookie cooldown right now. So the egg white one is definitely a little chewier and just spongier and almost crunchier on the outsides. There's also more of a contrast between the outside and the inside because they spread a lot more. The edges got a little crispier and the inside is a little bit soft. It kind of almost falls apart in not necessarily a great way. Nico said on the egg yolk only cookie, there was a softer tear, but both of them immediately agreed that they loved the taste of the egg yolk only one, which also is not a surprise. It's a lot more fat in egg yolks and it's richer. It's just better overall. It's kind of like using butter versus oil in certain situations. Rachel has now been converted to probably only using egg yolks in her cookies from now on. I think compared to the control, it depends on what you want. I think if you want a really dense, rich cookie, I think it's worth using the extra effort to put in those egg yolks. I would probably not recommend using only egg whites though. I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose of a cookie. It makes it this confusing muffin cookie hybrid that I wouldn't necessarily want to do. I think just make one or the other. If you got extra egg yolks, use those. That's another way to, make cookies. Okay, for the next one, Rachel actually came up with this test. This one is going to be testing the method of how you mix your dough. So the standard control one, we use a stand mixer, but how about using your hands to mix just the dough? Because not everybody has a stand mixer. And then what would it be like if you use your food processor? Kind of a weird outfield play that you wouldn't really think about to make cookie dough. Let's give it a shot. Mixing it by hand, I've done this many times. You definitely can't get the same amount of airiness and whip as the food processor one, so I'm expecting this to be a little bit denser. So here's the hand mixed dough, and with our food processor one, again, we're just adding everything in and the blade is mixing this dough together. And shockingly, not only does it work, there's a really cool effect that the blades create. Because they're slicing through everything in this thing, the chocolate chips also kind of get shredded up. So the dough almost becomes like a chocolate speckled cookie dough, something you don't get in a stand mixer or with other machines, purely because there's a blade in here combining everything. It's shearing and eroding away the edges of the chocolate chips and imparting it into the dough itself, so the color is way darker compared to any other method so far. I'm really curious to see one, how this bakes out, and two, how it tastes. Maybe we stumbled upon something really cool. Alright, you can probably tell which one the food processor cookie is. But let's start with the hand mixed one first. So the hand mixed one is definitely denser. There's less air in it because we don't have the stand mixer to whip that into it. It ripples a little bit more and looks like more of that like dense, solid, chewier cookie that you want. The food processor one is really interesting. So not only is it darker, it's ripplier, has these pockets of chocolate that are more spread out. It almost looks like a chocolate espresso cookie based on the color alone. When you eat the hand mixed cookie, I'm tasting a lot more granulated sugar crystals, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think if you like that extra crunch and burst, I think that's a great thing. And so when it comes to the food processor cookie though, this one tastes almost not like a chocolate chip cookie at all. It tastes like a chocolate cookie, almost like a brownie cookie. It also tastes sweeter because I think when you shave off shards of the chocolate chips into the dough, they're sweeter than usual and there's more sugar per dough area, if that makes any sense. Rachel likes it a lot. She said it's really soft and said it was just like a brownie cookie, but without having to make brownies. And I feel like it's a really good way to kind of make something out of an unideal scenario. You have a food processor, you don't have any stand mixers though. You want to make cookies, you do that, you not only get a brownie, you get a cookie as well. And it's a fun way to, I guess, change up the flavor and texture of it. You don't get these big pockets of chocolate chips as before. You just get more of a spread out chocolate chip flavor throughout the cookie. And visually, they look great. I think that was a really fun one. All right, next we're going to be testing different fats. This one was something we've been wanting to do for quite some time after testing the other ones. We are going to be testing coconut oil versus lard versus dry aged beef tallow, because we had that in the fridge, compared to the traditional method of just using butter, just to see how it affects texture, flavor, aroma, and just ultimately the experience of a cookie. So when we make each of these, we're going to be making the dough separately, and we're going to be using and substituting the butter with each of the fats mentioned previously. Here are the label. This is how they look, and let's see how they turn out. So the coconut oil is on the left. It's very spread out, super spread out and very flat, which makes sense because I think coconut oil has a softer melting point compared to butter. So it makes more sense that it's spread out faster than the butter. Lard one does not smell like lard at all. It just smells fragrant and aromatic in a different way. And I think if you didn't tell anybody, they'd be like, wow, this cookie smells great. The texture is definitely a little bit tighter compared to the coconut oil, which makes a lot more sense. Now the beef tallow one looks blonde, very blonde. There's almost no browning on it, which already is not off to the perfect start, but maybe that's just the way that it's just been dry aged and doesn't have those melty properties to where it almost didn't want to go. All right, let's move on to texture and taste. So the coconut oil one definitely looks like a Tate's cookie, but also kind of oily. Not a huge fan of that one. The lard was actually quite surprising. The lard tastes like a very aromatic cookie, like someone dialed up the aroma to 15, but unless you told anybody, I don't think they would suspect you used pig fat. So that one is actually really interesting. I can see why lard is used in many desserts and not just seen as a savory cooking ingredient. Okay, the dry aged beef tallow one definitely smells like a steakhouse, and we were the most curious about this one. Everyone smelled it and got really weirded out and excited at the same time. The decibel levels were rising after each nose got close to the cookie. Rachel did not like the aroma very much, it seems. Oh, she's gagging. That's great. All right, let's have Nico get in there. Rachel's on cooldown right now. Nico went and tried it.
No, that's really not good. It's like I'm eating a butcher shop.
Interesting. This is great. I'm just laughing in the back. Needless to say, we will not be using beef tallow in our cookies in the future. All right, next up is a pretty simple test. Baking dough temperatures. So, sometimes you leave the dough in the fridge, so sometimes you have it in the freezer for whatever purposes, and sometimes you just have it on the counter. Is there a big difference in where you start the dough from when it's put in the oven? Let's go ahead and see. We're gonna be baking a frozen one that's been pulled from the freezer, been solidly frozen. We're gonna be baking one also that's been left out and come to room temperature, and comparing that with the control, which is baked from the fridge. And obviously these baking times had to be adjusted. The frozen one got 3 more minutes, the room temperature one got 3 less minutes, just to make sure that they achieved ideally similar results in donenesses. And here they are. When you have a room temperature cookie, the fat is already more melted than the other two. So it's gonna spread a little bit more, it's gonna be a little bit more crispy, it's gonna start to go through that Maillard browning process a lot sooner than the other one. The frozen one is going to be more crispy only on the edges compared to the whole thing, while the inside is going to be more, I guess, blonde. So you can clearly tell that the one from frozen has the largest ring of just blonde cookie dough, and the one that is room temperature has more browning overall compared to the control. And the control, because it was in the fridge, is in between both, as expected. But it is really cool to see these side by side. So I guess it depends on what kind of cookie you want to achieve. Again, if you like Tate's, go for the middle one. If you like more contrast, go for the left one. Personally, I think contrast in a cookie is one of the most important things and most interesting things about a cookie from everything I've learned from people and pastry chefs. So I personally love to bake from frozen. It also gives you a lot of control and makes sure that you don't have that spreading problem that a lot of chocolate chip cookies recipes do have, depending on your oven as well. The flavor of the cookies is pretty much going to be identical, but the texture I think does play a very vital role in your chocolate chip cookie experience. So decide what you want for yourself. All right, the next test is going to be baking your cookies on the top rack and baking them on the bottom rack. As typically recommended, things are baked on the middle rack in ovens to keep things the most even, which is exactly the same rack we baked our control cookies on. What if you moved it all the way up, and what if you moved it all the way down? Will it actually affect the way it bakes? Let's find out. Here are the results. So, as you can see, the ones baked on the bottom rack, which is technically closest to the heat source, is way more golden brown just because it's getting a lot more heat. So these are gonna cook faster. These took like 3 minutes less and they got a lot more brown and just were ready to go a lot sooner. And the top cookies, you can tell by the visuals that it actually has more of an even spread in color throughout. It's the slowest to bake out of all 3. It took extra 3 minutes and it's the most even and has more time to spread out because it has less of the heat source blasting away the pan it's sitting on. Even though it's the closest to the top of the oven, which is made out of metal, I think just the distance away from the heat source does just make it bake at a slower pace. It's almost like a low and slow situation. Crispy golden brown all over is for the bottom rack. If you really rush for time and you like this kind of cookie, that's the rack for you. If you want more of like a low and slow bake that takes over 20 minutes, but you get a lot softer and gooier of a texture, I would say go for the top rack. And if you like somewhere in the middle, go for the control. But it was cool to see that just by adjusting your baking position of your pan instead of haphazardly throwing it on any rack, it will directly affect the way that your cookie turns out and how long it takes to finish baking. Because even though a lot of recipes have specific bake times, I think the most important thing is to know when it's done, either it's by eye or by smell. All right, the next one is a little bit more interesting. So the phrase pan banging cookies has been on the internet for quite some time. I believe a few people have made this really popular. It's a technique where you take a certain recipe of chocolate chip cookies and you slam the pan down on the counter to let the dough balls just get banged down between cooking, in the middle, and sometimes afterwards as well, creating a potentially beautiful ripple-y structure that makes it look really, really, really appetizing and amazing. If you looked up pan bang cookies, there's a few famous people that have really made it popular, and I've definitely tried this a few times, but I wanted to test how would it turn out if you banged it during the middle of cooking, as you're supposed to, versus banging it both in the middle of cooking and at the end of cooking, and if it's even worth taking your cookies out of the oven to make this extra step and wake up your neighbors and possibly damage whatever surface you're slamming your trays down onto. So for this method, we will be taking one out halfway through baking, dropping it onto the counter from probably like a 1 foot height and letting it just like slam down and flop around a little bit. It should be high enough to where clearly the dough is being agitated and spread out a little bit more, but not so high that everything flies off the table, and not so low that you're just kind of hitting it a little bit. It just need to be pretty severe. I will acknowledge that the original pan banging recipe is actually designed for this technique and is baked from frozen, but I wanted to see if this technique could be applied to just your normal chocolate chip cookie recipe and if it does make a difference. So after banging this one, it's going back in the oven. After banging the second one, we're actually going to bang it again after it comes out of the oven at the very end to see how they compare. And let's have a look. As comes to no surprise, if you move around your cookie and bang it a lot more, it's going to become flatter because you're just slamming it down while it's still hot and letting it spread out a lot more. And you're probably interrupting a lot of the browning at the very end too, so it kind of becomes less brown visually. What's cool about this one though is that normally chocolate chip cookies don't really melt into pools when you're making chocolate chip cookies using chips, but because of this method, you're actually agitating enough to where the melted chocolate inside the chip is actually being spread out and moved around. So it actually doesn't look like I used chocolate chips for the cookies that were banged twice, but the whole entire thing kind of becomes flat. It doesn't become thin, it just becomes flat, which I would say is pretty appealing when it comes to a cookie, because usually good ones made with good chocolate end up that way. And I think that is one way to kind of make your chocolate chip cookie not look like it was made with traditional chocolate chips. So from a texture point of view, you almost get these flatter pools of chocolate that when they're cooled firm back up, and you get these nice shard levels of chocolate that usually you can only achieve using good chocolate that melts really well in the oven. The flavor is still the same, but because the texture is less ripply, less studded with chocolate chips, it looks like a flatter, more gourmet cookie, and it eats like one as well, texture-wise. And I really like those like shards and levels of chocolate that end up in a really good chocolate chip cookie. All right, up next, we're going to be testing the rest times for dough. Now, personally, I'm a huge advocate of resting your dough as long as possible in the fridge and the freezer. Some people say a couple days. I've gone for weeks and months, and it has actually made a huge difference. But let's just keep this to testing a dough that's made and rested for an hour, so basically fresh, a dough that's rested for a day, and a dough that's rested for a whole week, and seeing how it comes out, flavor, texture, and visually. So Rachel was nice enough to make a control batch of the dough and have it ready a week in advance so that we can just bake them all at the same time. So let's bake these and see how they turn out. The fresh batch seems to be a lot more brown, and that makes a little bit more sense because the flour has not had enough time to absorb all of the butter, so the butter and the browning kind of happens a lot quicker. On the 1 week one, because the flour is hydrated and a lot of the browning agents that are typically exposed to the elements are now absorbed, it has less of that browning happen. It's more of this consistent, just rested up dough, which has been what I've noticed across making a lot of chocolate cookies. And the one that's been rested one day is in the middle. So Rachel is going to taste test this one. She said that the one that was made fresh and rested for 1 hour is definitely a lot crispier. You could probably get a lot more of those sugar crystals. You could taste it because the sugar has not had enough time to dissolve slowly into the liquids and into the flour. Upon a comparison, I think we all agreed, and including Rachel, that the 1 week rested dough is by far the most superior. Because the sugar crystals have been able to dissolve from the liquids and kind of mix with the rest of the dough, it activates less of a surface area on your tongue per square square millimeter, if that makes sense. It's almost like eating fruit versus drinking a smoothie. The fruits salad is going to be a lot more explosive and you taste each fruit more individually. The fruit smoothie though tastes really good, but everything's kind of blended down, so it's going to taste less sweet. The 1 week one tastes more complex because everybody has time to, exchange flavor molecules, and all the fat and water soluble flavor compounds finally have some chances to dissolve and kind of permeate as much of the cookie as possible. So every time you're taking a bite of it, you're getting way more flavor compounds of every ingredient you put in there per square millimeter on your tongue. The flour is hydrated, which means that's a little bit chewier, and everything has a more of a complex flavor. Is there a limit? Personally, I didn't have time for this video, but I have kept cookie dough in the fridge for a couple weeks and frozen it for a couple months and have baked it, and it did taste way different than just 1 week. Obviously, there's going to be diminishing returns, but I don't think it hurts to keep your cookie dough in the fridge for as long as you want, because I don't think that's going bad anytime soon if you store it correctly. And if you freeze it, I think it just gets better. So we've tested a lot of cookies in a lot of different ways to make cookies today. I hope that it's been educating and informing as it was for us, and it's just really cool to see these tests carried out next to each other. I decided to take all these random leftover half scoops of cookie dough and combine it into the pizookie. So this is technically every single test we've done together in one cookie form. So after it's mashed up, I'm gonna put it into a cast iron pan with some parchment paper and a sprinkle of Maldon on top after it's been baked. And yeah, this is the pizookie. And to be honest, it's kind of cakey. I think it's because there was a lot of that honey and maple syrup dough that had a lot of extra water that contributed to that. So it didn't really taste like the typical pizookie, and more like a chocolate chip banana bread, just no banana. But hey, we're not letting this go to waste. It's good food, and we're just going to pack that up. Also, all the cookies that we broke apart and showed for camera, obviously we didn't finish every single one, but these cookie shards that are perfectly fine were packed up into a couple of containers, and all of the dough and all the perfect cookies that weren't broken into were packed into another container. And the best part is that with all the perfect dough balls that we scooped out with all the dough, nothing was left behind. I took home probably 90% of this. And I'm always glad, because chocolate chip cookies, and the reason why I love making them and I love diving deep and exploring and making them again is, one, every time I make them, they come out different, even if it's the same recipe, which means that the little tiny adjustments will make a significant difference. Maybe I mixed one for 15 minutes. Maybe I baked it on a rack lower than the previous time. And I think if anything, today shows that going through all these experiments, most of these do have a significant impact on the way that your cookies will turn out. And maybe that's the fun part, is that they're never going to be the same every single time, and they're always going to be a little bit different, but there's always, hopefully, just one more thing to min-max and to improve and to make better and to learn. And maybe think that's why I make chocolate chip cookies so much, even though when I don't eat them a lot myself. They're also something that I think are universally loved, that people love eating and make for great gifts at any time, any day of the week. No one's really going to be mad that you brought them a cookie. And they're going to be excited because, well, who doesn't love chocolate chip cookies? So not only do I have a lot of cookies that I'm ready to give out to friends, I also have a lot of dough that will be interesting to see how long I can rest in my fridge for and how they'll turn out after a couple weeks, months, or even years. This was a very fun day for all of us. I've wanted to do this experiment for some time now, and I learned a lot more about cookies, even though I've been making them for so long that I thought I knew almost everything. I guess that's the fun part about food. When you really deep dive, you learn more, and you learn that you really know less than you even thought. Oh, before I go, I will say if I had to combine a couple of these adjustments to what makes a better version of a chocolate chip cookie, number 1, brown butter. Number 2, chop your chocolate fresh. Number 3, egg yolks only, if you have the time and the money for it. Number 4, rest it for at least a week, if not more. Number 5, bake it at 400. Obviously, there's so many things you can do with mix-ins, and my personal recipe has a lot of different things, but I think when it comes to traditional cookies, those ones are the ones that I'm definitely going to keep. Just not beef tallow. We're not going to discuss that one anymore.